that. So dear colleagues, today I'm really happy to announce the presentation of our guests, our colleagues from the faculty, from the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of our University High School of Economics, Stanislav Pashkov, and also our former student, our graduate, our colleague from the University of Ljubljana, Cilenšek. And today our colleagues will have a presentation on the topic, the image of economic stresses in news media of Slovenia and Russia. And this presentation is done in the framework of the series of research of scientific seminar that our lab is holding during this summer, which is devoted to the methodological and theoretical innovations in the field of social network analysis. And we invite speakers who share the latest results of the research and also show us some theoretical and practical things of their research. And yeah, so I'm really happy that today we have an opportunity to discuss this great topic. So now I will give the floor to Stanislav, and then I think he will be also giving it to Iris.
Sure. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, those who are listening now and those ones who are going to see the recording later. Our topic concerns the questions of so-called stresses in a news discourse of a couple of media titles in case of Slovenia and Russia. And so we propose here an idea how can we perform a so-called semantic network framework using our language facilities. But indeed, the question of image of economic stresses can be translated into the parts of the phrase being announced before in the main social networks and messengers. And this topic can be translated to something like the words you will see right soon. And in order to go steadily, we are going to discuss the two main parts. We assume that some of you probably haven't heard anything about semantic network, as well as the practical examples, how we managed to understand how to translate news messages into a more meaningful and in-depth analytical tools. And we will provide, first of all, some small discussion and some possible tips and tricks. And then we are going to perform a small case study showing off some of the results in the examples of Slovenian and Russian titles concerning recession. And after a particular break, we're going to dive into the real practical part. We're going to see how it can be achieved. And we can tell you that indeed this process can be explained and showed off really in a short time, thanks to our language. But as I've announced right before, our main topic is негативный добытчик. This word was announced as a real example of the modern trends in journalism, especially in Russia, for example. And this phrase is quite useful because it shows off something which is labeled as negative growth or profit, or even the so-called негативный прирост. This phrase is very useful because it consists of the two parts, which are semantically, in terms of the linguistic, social meaning, and so on, are controversial, because something what is called negative is usually negative, while growth should be considered as a positive. And when you see something like a negative growth or негативный добытчик in news articles or anywhere in the news messages, then we may come up with the question how to work with that. And you may ask another question, whether Is that really necessary to study that? And I would say that sometimes we need to understand how journalists really construct some of the topics and how they spread some key signals in their media articles, and what we can do if we find such ambiguities. Here are a small portion of examples from RBC and from Slovenian title called Ciol.net. In Russian case, we can see the fact that in Beijing somewhere has been marked a negative growth of the population, and this phrase seems to be in Russian language quite natural, because the prirost or growth is considered as something like an economic metric or an indicator, which may be sometimes quite negative or even positive. But when we turn to other media, I mean in other languages with other cultural and media styles or cultures in general, we may say that Dobichku or Dobichek may be considered as a fully negative word. And what if I say that indeed some of these words like отрицательный прирост or negative Dobichek is considered as a synonym for a phrase recession? And in this case, we face another question: how can we work with recession? Unfortunately, if we consider some small statistical analysis, we may find out that in reality, recession as a word, as a term, is not widespread. Maybe thanks to different cases, trends, that fact that we do not face a real signal for recession, and maybe when they are seldom met in some media flow, then we may consider that as a serious signal. But what if journalists put these words as a second-ordered or third-ordered object or signal in their usual text? In this case, негативный Dobichek is something like artificial, because this phrase was born in Russian media sphere, when one of the media titles used to depict some of the negative trends in some macroeconomy, which indeed could be emphasized as pro-positive. And instead of labeling a particular event as a recession, journalists managed to use the negative growth phrase instead. And at the same time, in their news content, they managed to include recession. But the question arises whether recession becomes a main topic of the article or not. And usually we tend to read out important news or economy, especially negative ones, from the headlines. And you can see some of the examples in Russian and Slovenian. And we can see the phrases like recessio, recessia, and somewhere something comes again. And in this case, we can come up only with this fact. We see these words and pretend to think that the whole content is devoted to this topic. But what if, again, this topic is not the main one? Usually, with this case, such issue of a non-vivid or again quite vivid representation of the case of recession in the news content becomes quite important, because there are multiple cases when, or not cases, but theories or ideas or facts, which help a lot to interpret these trends. And so to say that in reality, we know lots of facts about such negative news. But again, if we would like to understand in depth, using particular set of news or particular set of content, whether such important things happen in your data, then the question arises, how can we perform that? And that is why the motivation upon this project, upon this research, was the question, how can we uncover negative signals inside the text? Do we need to perform that manually, or we can apply some technical applications and scripts or even packages in order to solve such a difficult question? But also, we need to understand what is this question in details, because usually we can talk about negative growth or crisis or recession or some decline and so on and so on from at least two main parts. The first one devotes to some scientific knowledge. We are going to, and we are interested in understanding how particular events happen and what is driven by such recessions or crises, and how media reacts, and how media can construct such topic and deliver such difficult, term-loaded, overloaded information to an ordinary reader through networks, papers, gadgets, and so on. But there is also another path when we just need to grab some news articles and then uncover them, get some statistical or technical info, and then apply it for some recommendation systems or chatbots and so on. So these two paths usually are quite different. But in this case, when we want to understand how can we uncover, we usually follow the scientific way, which in turn means that we need to go deeper and start with a couple of steps, which are quite known in science. First of all, we need to state the research question, and we have done it according to the previous slide. Then we need to find some facts and theses from literature review, from empirical and theoretical works, which are present already. And this is in order to get some idea how theory explains such events, such ambiguities, and so on. Then we are ready, upon this knowledge, generate some assumptions and dive into our data. But what if, again, we would like just to go steadily, not steadily, directly to step 5 and do some natural language processing and network analysis, because it is quite interesting, fun, it may take time, and so on and so on. But you will see from the example that, and from this case study, that indeed this is not so simple, and we need some basic evidence which helps us a lot to understand what we get. If you have ever seen or heard about networks, you probably understood already that networks are very sometimes easy to generate and visualize, but at the same time very difficult to explain because they just represent something. And we need to get a strong evidence beforehand in order to make those images work for interpretation, recommendations, and in-depth analysis. So now my dear colleague Iris is going to present some of the basic assumptions which are necessary. It means that we're going not from step 5, but actually from step 2.
Hello, everyone, again. Now that you got a bit of feeling what we will cover in our session today, let's start with the question how we usually start with this kind of investigation. So as we face this multiple issues of significant shifts in economy, we require some quantifiable means to materialize these shifts and consider, for instance, the alternation in gross domestic product, GDP, or fluctuations in unemployment rates. And this indicator can help us as a window to broader economic situation, which extends beyond microeconomic changes by also impacting, as Stanislav already mentioned, individuals and society, as well as their behavior and institution. And one of such institutions that we are also interested in our analysis is, and also provides some operational coverage of events, is of course mass media. Next slide, please. And with the aim of conducting such analysis, we delved into the macroeconomic indicators, such as inflation and unemployment rates, focusing on the cases of Slovenia and Russia. We examined these two nations in response to this macroeconomic factors between 2010 and 2020, where we can also notice some distinctive patterns that have emerged. And our primary objective was to investigate this potential influence of mass media on biases, or let's say these negative signals, and by exploring the mechanism underlying this influence. And we sought to understand the ways in which media depicted periods of crisis through various approaches, while also exploring some potential connections between methods and networks. Our analysis also involved visual assessing significant changes in this economy, in this period, and we tried to somehow, again, find some relationship between media, negative signals, networks, and the economy. And at this point, I would like to emphasize also the potential downsides of relying solely on macroeconomic analysis that we also present here, because it often provides the broader overview of economic health, but consequently potentially oversimplifying the complexities of microeconomy, so individual behavior and some sectoral dynamics. Plus, the downside of microeconomy, the analysis is usually that it is reported with lag, which means that we can only, we are limited to respond, we are actually limited not be able to respond swiftly to some trends and crises. But as we will see later, we were, by using alternative methods, such as we did in semantic network, we were able to even predict, or at least depict some economical changes. And which, by incorporating this text analysis as well as microeconomic insight, we can actually provide more holistic understanding of situation, while also, of course, ensuring that our approach is data-driven. Next slide, please. I lost my... Okay. Yeah, this is, but before we delve into more methodological part of this, let's take a look at some communication, mass media communication theories and sociological one, which actually emphasize the approaches in which media heavily influences economy and vice versa. And one of the well-known is gatekeeping theory, introduced by Kurt Lewis in 1943, which originated from his research during the World War II, where he was interested in the changing habits in households, food habits in households. And he actually observed how the food journey from source to the table involved and actually found out that it involved some gatekeepers. These were usually housewives, which make a decision. They make a decision by buying groceries, and then, of course, serving them, or at least deciding what will you eat for dinner. In this way, he actually, let's say, posite the term or phenomenon of gatekeeper, which are, if we put it in our case, we can perceive them as a journalist, who actually are as well also data decision makers, in a way that they control information flow to an entire social system. So this is usually done based on their personal preferences, experience, social influence, or bias, through, of course, different tools that we will see. Headlines are usually the ones that are more, let's say, that have the biggest power, or serve as a powerful tool in this. So to sum it up, gatekeeping is somehow a process of selecting and filtering items of media, but at the same time, this also means that gatekeeping can be also perceived as surveillance and monitoring data. Additionally, not only does the journal present some kind of gatekeepers, but also individuals ourselves can act as a gatekeeper during the consumption of certain news, creating also some kind of secondary filter for information. For instance, I don't know, if you reside in the northern part of Russia, and then some content in news about sunscreen emerges, you will definitely not, that will definitely not be relevant for you, so we will actually filter it and will not pay attention to it. The second is the agenda setting theory, which posits that media has the power to influence which issues and topics are considered important by simply deciding what topics to cover and how to present them. So in this essence, media doesn't necessarily tell people what to think, but rather how to shape the mind of people, or how to shape what people think about. And we have the agenda setting theory was all actually made on 3 levels. The first stage, this is the stage where media selects and emphasizes certain topics or events more than others. And gatekeeping also plays a part here, because we still, again, our journalists decide what stories to cover and how much attention do we have to pay to them. And this is where, of course, the role of media plays. On the second level, the media influences how the public thinks about these issues by, again, emphasizing certain aspects, framing stories in particular way, and also providing some context. This is also a level sometimes called as framing, of which theory will I present a little bit later. But at this stage, it is important to, let's say, it actually covers, the media actually covers issues the public consider to be important. So it's not only is covered by the media, but here also the role of public comes in play. So again, it depends, of course, on the public preferences, values, and discussions that also play a role in shaping this agenda. And on the third level, we have agenda settings pertains to the degree of importance that are in certain public. So basically, the media not only shapes what people think about, but rather how much they think about. So this is also a stage which focuses on the intensity of the of attention given to this various topics. And in this case, policy-making process come into play, because when public perceive some issues as important, which is also consequently probably because media displays them more frequently, policymakers are also likely to address those issues through legislation, through other means, and thus media somehow selection as well as public perception of issues can indirectly impact the policy agenda. So this is how everything is intertwined. Framing theory is, as I already mentioned, is also related to agenda setting, but it also expands by focusing on the essence of issues rather than a particular topic. So the basis of framing theory is that media focus attention on certain events and then place them into the field of meaning. For instance, if the country is experiencing significant increase in inflation rate, in framing, media can present this as a negative consequence, can present this just as a negative consequences of high inflation. So they might, I don't know, highlight how rising prices are causing some financial hardship for families, how some necessities are missing, how people cannot afford them. And thus, they present some interviews with economists, consumers, individuals who struggle. In the next framing, media can also portray inflation, for instance, as a natural phase of economic cycle. And of course, this could be discussed somehow as common occurrence in health economics and can indicate growth and so on. And in such a way, they will also use some tools to present inflation in such manner. So in essence, framing theory actually suggests how something is presented to the audience. And all of these three actually presents ways of how media can actually manipulate public, also as well as by presenting different economic cases. Next slide, please. And all this previously mentioned phenomena, of course, leads to a certain biases. Next interesting study was actually exploring how people's perception of bias in specific news sources relate to their broader beliefs about media bias as a whole. And the first hypothesis of the study, they presented two hypotheses which were also accepted, is that ordinary people see less bias in sources that are widely considered to be highly biased by journalists. And as such, they're more likely to believe that bias exists across the entire media industry. This could be probably because people think that even sources with a knowledge biased are not biased, and they might conclude that bias is something inherent in most media outlets. Secondly, if there are noticeable differences, they were also interested in differences between how professional within the journalism industry and general public perceives bias in sources. If they're presented as having minimal bias, these differences will contribute to a stronger belief among general public. In the context of these two hypotheses, when public perception of bias diverge from professional judgment, it can actually undermine public trust in media objectivity and potentially also reinforcing the perception of widespreading bias in the media. And of course, this bias is usually spread through the usage of language that media uses. As the next study found, the bias is usually focused or spread by the use of language. In order to find it, the following researchers developed headline attention network model that was able to detect bias in newspaper articles. And result shows that considering that only headlines could predict bias with almost the same accuracy as considering the entire article. So the proposed model improved bias detection accuracy, definitely by also incorporating both headlines and the article content. And experiment, this results also showed that actually their model outperformed other models, so especially neural network-based technique, and achieved actually the high accuracy in predicting bias. And it also, of course, emphasized how the usage of, again, language in creating desired narratives in media and, of course, consequences that come with them. Next slide, please. So why then we study news quality? So as we could see, there is an interplay between media biases, negative signals, language manipulation through headlines, and public perception actually hold a profound implication for our understanding how both social dynamics and affect and economic trends. And studies that we mentioned before shed light on how biases can emerge and be reinforced again through different media portrayals, again, not only affecting the individual's beliefs, but potentially rippling into collective economic behaviors. And the new headline attention network that was previously mentioned was reveal these biases. So we decided to actually use this approach to somehow connect these economic trends with the content of news. And this led us to create a simple yet effective pipeline in which of course combine both text and network. And our goal was to develop a good topic modeling that would also combine, which will be based on probabilistic outcomes, as well as it could also take into account the outcomes of the structural analysis. Next slide, please. So what kind of methodological challenges did we encounter? In general, this machine learning based method can perform well on sparse or high volume based data. However, when we work with context analysis, probabilistic models, for instance, LDA, BART, and so on, often result in biased outcomes, as they're not able usually to take into account large variations as well as tokens. Another issue is that when computer analyze this data, they don't always take into account the context of the situation. And this also makes it harder for them to understand the data correctly. To make it even more complicated, the text that we're usually dealing with is not always written perfectly, especially if we deal with textual data from social media, which is full of slang, short forms, comparison. They will probably fail because they are not able to capture this real world. In the field of, so this is the advantages of machine learning models, but in the field of social sciences, we have widely known technique of context analysis, which also helps us to break down language barriers with this precise categorization. But the problem of this model method is operational issues usually, especially when we are dealing with more than 4,000 documents. It wouldn't work well. We wouldn't be able to perform it well. Yeah. So due to this numerous challenges, future professor Stanislav Pashkov developed the idea of a semantic network, which could be presented or perceived as some intermediate tool for in-depth exploration of textual content structures. And we would, through this approach, we would be able to analyze text comprehensively, but also which would also provide some logic of topic modeling, semantic attention, and some similar topics with more accent on the qualified textual analysis. Next slide, please. Applications. So in many projects and publication, people usually use Python and specialized software because they're seen as widely applicable and they usually fit in processes. However, there can be difficulties when we deal with them, especially when we deal with specialized tools of it, which are Aura on LT-Key. So to tackle these difficulties, and because we also had some previous knowledge in our software program, we decided to continue with this software, within which we used iGraph and Stringer packages. Besides that, we also used SemNet, which helped us. SemNet package will also help us to analyze the relationship between words and concepts in the text, and it can be useful, especially when we try to understand the underlying themes, connections, and association within a corpus of the text. In addition, we used Corpus Tools package, which is also very, very useful, as we are able to perform some cleaning and preparing tests. It also extracts some linguistic features and conducting some content analysis on the corpus as a whole. Both packages, CenMet and Corpus Tool, as well as String and REST and iGraph, offer valuable tools for researchers who aim to delve into the structure of textual analysis, and also contribute to some systematic data-driven approach that we decided to take. Next slide, please. Specific. So the message here is that when working, of course, usually with different R packages, it is also important to know that that these packages have a strong, at least the time-based, TM-based packages also have a strong reliance on Snowball C package. And in other words, all these packages within our software are usually interconnected, and they play a crucial role in tests. So you really have to know how to work with them. UDPipe models we also encounter with the problem with understanding structural patterns of Slovenian languages, where my help over my knowledge of Slovenian language came in handy, because I was able to. We basically did it manually to extract some words that were not they were not applicable here. Whereas the language for English and Russian worked quite well. We were accurately able to handle stop word removal, as well as some part of speech tagging. And this also underscored the complexity of language-specific processing that we encountered within this R package system. Okay, next.
Okay, now a question. What's going on if we would like to work with all of that? And you probably have noticed that everything being discussed by Iris, thanks a lot to her speech, seems to be quite difficult, meaning that too much knowledge, too much code, maybe too much practices and principles are necessary in order to take into account everything from the very beginning to an end, in order to get something you have already seen, like networks, some parts of the corpus tools processing, and so on. But in reality, our language, apart from Python, is designed historically to be special for different scientific-oriented tasks. And it means that when we need, for example, to get some textual data, reprocess it, and get some output, we have special packages which in turn have very limited number of functions dealing ideally with the result. And before working with practical section as well, the case study, let's grant some knowledge about specific terms we're going somehow apply. We're all talking about the two main strategies in this case. So imagine you want to include textual data for something which is more complicated than manual content analysis, and at the same time more relaxed in the opposite to some machine learning algorithms which require more knowledge, sometimes more technical power, and so on. And you have at least two strategies. You first of all need to write some application or program or procedure, for example, in our language. And the second one is to get some news in such a way that the computer may understand. In general, the process of turning from something which we can read out from screen or some paper after scanning procedures, and then tell the computer what does it mean, I mean the text, words, phrases, sentences, and so on, is called in general natural language processing or NLP framework. And maybe you probably heard about NLP turning to Python with spacey models and OTK and so on, which have their own challenges with coding, with understanding how to start with, how to continue, and so on. And you probably expect that in our language, the complexity of preparation of procedures may be the same. But very soon, you will see that this is R, which helps a lot to deal with such a problem. And even if you haven't heard anything about R language and packages and its own functions, you will have the possibility to understand a very limited number of them, which are necessary for this case. And also, hence, we are going to discuss some of the specifics of the process. So that's, let's imagine, like Python or any other language you probably know, we start setting up the environment. We are loading some packages, we are setting up some folder with future files, future session material, and so on. And at the same time, we need to find some article, a news item, and then understand how to download some text, and then tell R to somehow proceed. The process of acquisition of such text is called crawling. And why I'm mentioning Python is the fact that sometimes Python language is very powerful, very profound in terms of functionality, but when we need just to take a single web page, a single textual element, it may be too much. And in our language, on the opposite side, we have a special package which consists of only two main functions, plus one technical, so that's three main functions only, which are very short. You will see them on the screen. They take only 3 lines of code, and they help a lot to collect, that is, crawl, parse, meaning that we get out all the information, whether it is text or some other technical tags or something like that in a web page. And then we are able to process it further for making this text technical for further analysis. For example, translating that to a corpus tools package. In this process, you can see on the right is the following, that we try out to find in the web page the elements which always hold the area of text, area of banners, links, and so on. And thanks to special descriptors, so-called, or tags, we're able to tell our code what we're going to take. For example, on the textual fragments, which are surrounded by tags like P. And then writing 3 lines of code, we tell R that please download this web page, please find all the pieces of the web page considering only this P descriptor, and then compose all the collected data into some meaningful text. Later, we get this whole content, which we see on a typical website, and then we just perform some small checkout, cleaning, because as usually in data science world, we take around 80% of time with cleaning data. And in this case, when working with textual material, we can easily clean out some unnecessary technical items which may not be well found by corpus tools, and we help a lot and increase the overall speed of processing. And eventually, using corpus tools as well as iGraph package, we create a special table of parts of speech recognition, so-called, which means that we get the previous table where we see original words or tokens being divided into parts of speech, the main part of the word or lemma, and so on and so on, in order to line only those tokens which represent nouns and adjectives and adverbs, for example, which are extremely useful for further content analysis. What we usually see when we are using manual coding is semi or practically automatically being processed. And right after getting such a table, we are ready to make a so-called semantic network, or a network of associations between those tokens. Because what you will see next, especially in practical section, that when we perform the natural language processing, one of the key goals is to make text as standardized, so-called, as possible, which means that we try to make all the words resembling each other. For example, if we talk about recessions and recession, and we need to make it standardized, it means that recessions should be considered as recession, so that in a singular form, in the initial form. And Corpus Tools does that practically automatically. It is ideal for example, Russian language, English language, and as Iris mentioned, sometimes Corpus Tools, which uses special modules called UDPipe, may slightly fail with the Slovenian language, but thanks to R, again, to its codes and practice, it is possible to quickly fix it and then generate a final product, a semantic network or a graph, upon which we can do everything. First of all, as usual, when talking about graphs, we are visualizing something we get out of the table of tokens. And the form of the network is based upon the position of tokens in the original text, the frequency of those tokens being standardized, and so on and so on. And you will see next that messages, news items will have completely different shape and form. And if you will be curious enough, you will notice that in case of comparison between Russian and Slovenian news items, there are some specifics which are maybe culturally or linguistically driven between them. It is one of the most important outcomes we have discovered through this research. But also, in order to get some real numeric recognition of the networks, we of course use some metrics. And for semantic networks, we usually use the two metrics, so-called between the centrality and page rank, which keep the idea behind the graph theory and social network analysis theory about the way we can evaluate the position of some object called nodes, or in our case, a token, in the cloud of all the tokens in this network, and see whether particular words can hold the core structure or a part of it, of the whole network. So that's the main thesis of this slide, is the fact that this very complex and difficult scheme will be quite easily done in practical part. So that we should not be scared about that, but this scheme will help us to follow particular guidelines, which eventually may be called as a framework. Okay, so now the word is to Iris, and she is going to present some of the facts we have found in the case study.
Sorry about that. I have two screens. I'll try to imagine it. So yeah. So let me first introduce the datasets that we use. So first of all, we first used the Lenter rule. That was the so Lenter rule is somehow the comprises of over almost 100,000 news articles, and it is available online. That's why we also use it. But given that our team focused more on news that were related with economy, this ends up presenting only 10% of the whole data set. And within that, we also isolated an even smaller portion of it that was actually directly related to recession. When dealing with Slovenian Times, we had to manually gather web pages using RVS tool. We successfully handled different various website designs and front-end programming challenges, which was also something new and interesting for us, as we typically do not focus on these aspects. We also identify, can you please move to the next slide? We also identified news articles from RIA site and Seoul.net, because we want to identify differences from previously mentioned datasets. RIA is also an open source available dataset, whereas for Seoul.net we also again use this parsing algorithm to collect its data. So yes, that was the dataset that we use. And now it's time to delve into the images that we made for you. We've been figuring out how actually betweenness centrality and page rank works in different cases, and how this measurement behave differently, and which are of course their own limits. In the context of analyzing the degree and betweenness centrality, we relating to this token association, Lintaru actually shows some different interesting valuable insights. The first one is that within this news from Lintaru, there lies a lot of emphasis on the news items related to the countries, such as Russia and USA, along with economic terms such as economy, growth, and recession. Regarding the betweenness centrality, we found out that the token recession stand out as one of the one of the significant players, whereas the Russian was one of the most important one. And this suggests that recession also holds a key position in connecting these different parts of new articles. However, in the terms of degree centrality, recession appears to be less frequent compared to GDP. So this somehow hints the relationship of economic indicators like GDP that might be more frequently mentioned, while the recession actually plays somehow some intermediary position in this network. And this is somehow interesting because from this we can conclude that Lintaru news are usually focused more towards specific country, in this case maybe Russia, USA relation, while also economically oriented items, where of course recession plays a vital role as somehow bridging like different aspects within news. Next slide, please. When we examine the same network measurements within Slovenian Times, we also uncovered some interesting trends. And one of the most interesting one was that the emphasis of the country itself. So with Slovenia nation, because I was really surprised as if we are the most nationalistic country in the world, as well as the principal actors such as government or agents in playing part in this economic trends, such as government and president. In terms of betweenness centrality, the token recession was mentioned less frequently compared to the crisis. But despite this, it still remains somehow a focal point within each article still. When we analyze the degree centrality, the recession exhibit slightly fewer appearance again than crisis, which again shows that Slovenian news actually prefer to use crisis in discussion, while recession maintains still a notable presence in the network, but to the lesser extent. Next slide. So the RIA news also shows some interesting dynamics, because the token recession stand out a significant degree. So it shows that it has some substantial attention to the concept of recession within the platform. But when we looked at the more advanced matrices, the page rank centrality is estimated at around 11. Is that the same? Yeah, it is the same. No, okay, my bad. Yeah, the recession in this context was actually ranging from 1 to 100, where with exceptional case even reaching to 300. And this divergence of the page rank centrality also suggests that varying degrees of recession itself within the network. And this observation that actually the recession holds a special significance in RIA news, because it also serves as a central theme across various articles, additionally to the fact that it is very important and influences a text differently. So it contributes to some dynamic nature of RIA news content network. Yeah, and this is in the Seoul. Yeah, Seoul. We also analyze the degree in betweenness centrality again. And in this case, yeah, the token recession reached around, was estimated around 11.4. And again, it somehow shows the relevant influence of different nodes within the network. However, it's also possible to say that recession in this case also holds a significant degree of around 1,200, which also was carried out in automated manner. And this also shows again light on how important this concept is. Betweenness centrality was very hard to calculate it. So the hence metric was not extracted, but despite this, we still get the significant degree of recession and page rank centrality, which of course contribute to the better understanding of the context, content dynamics within this news. Okay, next. As we could see, network analysis has a lot of offer. You can actually set up a whole pipeline, as you will do with just a few lines of code. And it helped us to create some interesting network that allowed us also to play with this network measures. And here we did with low page rank. When it comes to specific news pieces, we actually were able to detect certain structure of sentence of the journals within this certain news providers. And we could see, for instance, in Lintaru that we can observe this extended connections, loops, and also relations to one another. So this also posites that, or at least suggests some logical manner in the sentences. However, when you look at the Slovenian Times, the focus tends to be on a certain individual items. So we see this distinction in how news content is actually constructed differently. Yeah, that's it. I think, yeah. Slide. Yeah. Page rank, of course, has also, as we said, it has the potential to influence the architecture of the news articles, and a greater page rank corresponds to shorter articles. So this is because usually high-ranked nodes in our network become more interconnected, And this is also provides some attention to article length. And from this, we could also exhibit some help me please, Dan.
Yeah, at least we can notice a very interesting tendency that when, as Iris mentioned, the more complex becomes the news article or a set of them, the more significant should be the page rank for our token of interest. But again, it depends on these two main cases, like the topic. And as we started from the very beginning, recession sometimes is defined as very specific topic, which means that we need to take care of rare tokens as more significant ones. And we may think about that as a possible assumption, but in reality, it turns out that recession can be also a peripheral item. And thanks to the process of data processing, it is possible across a couple of news articles to see what's going on. What can we notice from article to article, and whether they are all united by something. And another important impact of such calculations is the fact that we can show off some frequencies or tendencies. And on the right, you see how recession as a token of interest is spread from one article to another, and whether the level of page rank value is located more or less in those in that corpus of text. And we can notice that in most cases, the page rank is all around 0 or something like lower levels, values, meaning that recession seems not to be the most important aspect of a news article. And this leads to a question then how it is located somehow. From the previous slides, you can see that we have a big network which can concentrate some tokens in particular links. And in these examples with large page rank, it means that recession token is hidden in some of those small nodes. And it means eventually the fact that here recession in such news seems not to be significant, which can be proven through a more general analysis. And when we turn to something like medium page rank, we may find out that in reality, there is a tendency. The fact that more page rank becomes less is the size of a document. And recession may be now hidden in one of those bridges, so-called, or nodes, which have too many connections with different parts of the semantic network. Coloring scheme here is also applied by special graph algorithms, which help a lot to divide the spectrum of nodes into some thematic interlinks. This helps a lot to understand how those bridges or nodes with links which resemble bridges between parts of the network helps a lot to make some sort of eager network or parts of the network with closest associations to them. And here, and especially in the next examples with high page rank, you will notice one of the most interesting aspects of a Russian versus Slovenian style, saying that the way journalists compose the chain of ideas in the news items. You can notice that from one Russian example to another one, the tokens are chained heavily. so that you see some different forms of chains, different semicircle forms, and so on, while Slovenian cases are more concentrated. It means that they do not chain heavily. And this is quite unusual because when we shifted from one news article to another, this fact used to become quite evident. And here we may say that one of the possible reasons why recession in Russian media is maybe less sometimes concentrated than in Slovenian one is the fact that the structure of semantic associations is quite complex in Russian case and less one in Slovenian one. We can go further and see the higher page rank or relative importance of particular nodes in the network are present, the more significant become token. And still, we see how beautiful may be the form of the chains for Russian case from message to message. And you can notice here that we labeled recession token as recessi, singular standardized form for any other forms like recessia, recessiu, and so on. We standardize to this one, and we managed to understand that sometimes PageRank as a metrics becomes more stable, because for real news article with medium PageRank, we may see that between the centrality is 0. That this metric didn't work well. And it also means that PageRank, which was originated from Google search form algorithm in historical pattern, becomes more reliable for such textual items. And still, again, circular chain-based forms are quite beautiful. That is why we were admired through the analysis by the way journalists compose messages. And scientific Seoul.net perspective, as you see on this similar pattern with medium and high PageRank, is more concentrated. You do not see so well chain forms, but more clusters of tokens which deal with particular sets of news items or ideas like oil prices, decline, and so on. And according to specifics of the Slovenian language, we may find out that sometimes Slovenian language considers different forms of the same word like recession, and still, even in this case, the relative significance becomes quite evident. So, in small portions of conclusions, the fact that recession is not such an often topic becomes evident from one case to another, but when we apply more technical perspective, more technical views, we are able to dive into the internal structure and find out more and more unusual patterns which uncover the reason, for example, why recession as a token, as an object of the study, becomes not so significant, and journalists try to subset this word with other adjectives, nouns, and so on, in order to somehow make the news message more positive, even if the whole content is fully negative. And from period to period, we notice that when the particular macroeconomic situation increases in depth, in negative pattern, news do not generally follow this idea. It means that recession as a pattern lives something like decently, and is put in those cases when the message should be emphasized as more negative rather than positive. And through such a technique, it was possible to pick up. And as a side effect is the possibility to see how journalists really concentrate on those patterns of the idea composition, whether it is possible to find out some sort of gatekeeping or framing patterns. It is also possible. And the second side effect is the fact that with our language, it is possible to compose such a framework, such a pipeline more easily, because we do not need to code a lot, but concentrate more on the content and on the interpretation itself. So that is, in general, what we would like to discuss and show off in this case, with some methodological aspects as well as some visualization ones. And I think that right soon we are going to see how that pipeline can be organized. And we will use a couple of news items from the very beginning of our language knowledge, in order to understand that R is quite simple in order to get this network done. Again, thank you very much. It's my colleague as well for such a description. Do you have any questions considering this part?
Dear colleagues. Looks like not.
Okay. So,
yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Then right soon we will switch to some technical practice.
Yeah, we will propose to have a 15-minute break. So actually we can start like at 7:30. Yeah. Okay. Let me pause.
All right. Now let's turn to some practice. And in order just to focus on the way we're going to work with some steps in order to get similar social semantic networks, I will just announce a small handout which will be delivered to you as a public handout right after the seminar quite soon. It will contain all the information, all the basic principles which are necessary with this well-known scheme, with some other images and so on, which will be quite useful for you in order to understand what is going on. But in order to make everything, it's like a spoiler of today's talk, in order to get this quite easily and steadily, I will turn it off and start with a white list. And we are going to discuss a couple of questions. First of all, that is the question of the R language itself. Maybe some of you probably do not know anything about that, thinking that R language is quite specific and maybe not so useful for you, for your needs. By the way, in order just to make sure everything goes right, do you see my web browser well? Can you please react?
Yes, it's fine.
Thank you very much. So we are going to discuss, first of all, the R language. And if you haven't heard about this language, these environments formally, and would like to understand more, you are able to join the main webpage of rproject.org, which is the homepage for our project for statistical computing, which has all the necessary links, especially those ones dealing with installation of the environment as well as language interpreter. It is quite lightweight, apart from probably some Python experience. It doesn't require Anaconda itself. You will just need something like your ordinary computer, some add-ons like RStudio or Visual Studio Code. But for today's seminar, I will use Kaggle platform because it will be affordable for you, provide some possibilities to try out everything we're studying today without installation. And if you enjoy this experience, you will be able, for example, to contact me if necessary in order to help you install this application. I'm always ready and motivated to help in this case. So we are going to work with R language, and I will announce some basic principles which are necessary for today's talk in terms of programming, in terms of writing functions. And we are going to work with a couple of packages or additional modules which are dealing with their own job. First one is called RWest, which deals with crawling process. We are going to use this package in order to make some magic for taking some web page and extracting some news content. And even here from this usage section, you will find that actually the process of crawling the web page seems to be quite easy. I mean, quite short in code writing as well as the principles. And you will see that indeed only 3 lines of code is necessary in order to get a web page. Another important package is called Stringer. Stringer is a module which deals with so-called regular expressions. That is the situation when you need to find and replace some symbols, items, or recode something into different manner. And Stringer is considered as the fastest and most flexible package in this case. And when I deal with semantic network analysis, practically 98% of time consumption is devoted to Stringer, because I need to find and replace lots of different unnecessary tokens or unnecessary symbols. And I get the result even on big amounts of news items quite easily and quickly. And last thing is the corpus tools. We will see its further technical realization, which is based upon so-called UDPipe models. And UDPipe models are the most essential things I admire and I'm proud of when I work with corpus tool package, because this module is dealing with the process of conversion from raw text into a table of part of speech recognition and further with the network. But all this magic cannot be done without those language models called UDPipe. And those universal dependencies models are prepared for lots of languages, including English, Slovenian, Russian, Dutch, Irish, and so on. It means that if you have a text in a particular language with 98 or 95% of probability, the language model will be able to deal with parts of speech recognition, with stemming, grammatization, and all other parts of natural language processing framework. And this significantly reduces time for doing some further job, I mean creation of the network and investigation of its structure. And for this seminar, I prepared 2 articles for you from Slovenia Times in English about recession, and from Ciol.net in Slovenian language, also dealing with Slovenian language. And although these 2 sources are completely different and they may require completely different approach to parse, scroll, and evaluation, indeed, everything will be something like copy-paste, thanks again to R. Now it's time to understand why R provides such an effort for us. Again, about the former scheme in high resolution. So we are going to start with this module. We will load or install in Kaggle platform the packages like RWest, iGraph, and corpus tools. And if you probably heard about Kaggle, I set up an environment in such a way that I use R language without any persistence. And in order to be able to work with Kaggle platform, if you are new to that, no problem. You will be given a link to a notebook, which kindly will let you create your own copy, and you will be able to play around with its interface, where we are going to work with special fields, so-called codes. and special buttons like run particular cell or area of the platform which deals with code or deals with text, so-called markdown. And we will be able to set up some additional options which can be popped up using this arrow button. So as I've said, we will start with the loading packages, so-called. If you heard anything or used to work in Python, it is something like import particular module or pip install particular module, and then import as acronym or something like that. In our language, we have similar pattern. We use the function called install packages. I grab, then I can copy and paste from igrab to purpose tools, then stringer, and then to harvest. But hopefully, Kaggle platform provides all these packages being installed from the very beginning. When I launch the session here, turning on this button, I'm able to start a temporal session of 12 hours for any playgrounds, any play work, and so on. And as I've said, all these packages are pre-installed. So to be brief to this format, I can say that our language is a very specific one. It is quite difficult sometimes to understand once for the first time, but later, when you understand why such simple functions are considered this or that way, you will get all the extra possibilities to get your workflow done easily and quickly. Means that we do not have in our language so many specialized long functions or long structures. Instead, we have functions as tools. If we need to do this, we have this special function. If we need to do that, we have another special function. And R is organized this way if I try to translate the whole concept into something like a natural language. So instead of pip install, we have special function with dots separator called install packages. If we need to load the packages, like import something, we use special function called library. And I will use this pattern to load packages like igrab, purpose tools, then stringer, and harvest. You can see this arrow. I can try to launch it. I get some messages. They are colored red. We may think that there is an arrow, but if I see that this step is done, according to any sort of Jupyter notebook style, if we have such a number, then it means that this code chunk is done. So that in this platform, as well as in any Jupyter platform, all these chunks are evaluated one by one, and we can divide those chunks into particular groupings of actions, which resemble particular set of aims and goals. And this helps a lot to simplify understanding where we started and what we have done to particular moment. So we loaded those packages. We've done this step very easily, so that we do not need to import as something. We just called library, and then one of the smallest but nasty drawback of our language is the fact that we have to learn particular function names which are hidden in its nature. And apart from Python, where we can like numpy dot particular function or stat models dot particular function or beautiful soup dot particular function, we have to learn some functions provided by those packages individually. But you will see that for this case, not so many packages are necessary. Now we need to write some R code in order to set up future name of the object, the so-called loaded website, and its HTML content. If we have later a particular portion of time, I will explain how generally our language is organized. But still, if you have any questions, you are free to interrupt and I will be able to react if necessary. So please notify me and I will be able to react to your question. We need to write some function. In our language, apart from Python, we announce any object, so-called, or variables, or data sets, or something we need to store permanently for the session using the following pattern. We have, for example, variable, which can be assigned, to which something can be assigned. So this pattern is absolutely universal across our language. It means that we have some object. Okay, so object can be also be the same. It's like a synonym. Some object value or some variable value is universal across R. So that when we want to store something, we store that to an object name and some value or action. Even action is possible to mention here, is considered inside the code. This principle is quite useful across our packages because they help a lot to simplify this flow of functions in order to start from the beginning to an end. As long as we need to create some.
Just could you please zoom in a little bit the screen? Just
oh yeah, no
much.
problem.
Yes.
Is that better?
Yes, this is better. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much for mentioning. So as long as we need to write something which deals with loading the web page or something like that, we need to understand how can we write that. So what we need to include. That is why, apart from, again, Python perspective, we need to understand what particular package offers to us in order to formulate or to proceed this action. According to RWES website, we have some reference cards. And thanks to our ecosystem being originally developed by scientists, we have a very feature-rich documentation system, which helps a lot with examples, some even scientific papers as groundwork to understand how every function is organized. And you can see here that apart from beautiful soup, that is the end. So that is the whole set of functions we need for any sort of crawling. And particularly, where in 95% we'll be using only the particular function called HTML element and read HTML, which is not present here, but was present in this usage example. So at least this line and this line is practically all in terms of crawling data. So these are the two lines. We will see the third one, which decomposes the structure. So we're going to get something resembling this structure of raw HTML code parsed of crowds from the website, and then with a set of magic being provided by the package itself, we will be able to get some meaningful output. So our step one is to write something which collects or downloads a copy of web page to our session. So that's, let's imagine we are going to work with Slovenia Times and CO.net. So let it be a cell times object, use item. And you can see that like Python, we're able to use any sort of special technical symbols to make a long object name. We are going to perform 3 simple steps. we need to download web page. Then we need to tell R how can we search for particular textual content. And then we will kindly ask R to compose all collected metadata into a form of an original natural text. What does it mean now? In this case, we see a typical news article provided by Slovenia Times. We're interested in collecting everything which considers this news item, excluding any buttons, excluding header, excluding images, some pop-up, sites, links, and so on, only this content for further processing and then generating the semantic network. And the first step here usually is to tell R to download this web page. So I copy and paste this into the my code cell and add a special function or action. You can follow again this pattern, then that in our language we are always running something like the pattern action, then storing this action, the results of that into an object. So according to the example provided by RWest, we need to use read HTML function in order to download the web page for our session. No problem. Something what resembles Python probably can be done here. We just provide this action and probably similar to Python or sometimes unlike Python, we are able to print out some content just by calling this object of interest. So I will just use either print or hashtags are also used for comments like in Python, just SL times in order to get the output. So let's see what we have. We have an output. It means that R managed to download into its session the content of the web page being described as HTML document. In general, I would say that all the web pages are composed as HTML documents, and they have very tight syntax for any sort of formatting. And RWest magically deals with finding some real content out of this mess of those HTML descriptors and tags. But there is a question. We have downloaded. We are able to work now with this object, which contains the copy of web page for our further needs. But how can I extract this news content from such an object? In order to do so, we need to follow another side strategy from bottom that we've done already. We've launched the browser, any old browser, like Firefox or Chrome or Chromium. And we need to launch the developer tools in order to perform some further actions, which you can see on the right, that will launch a special regime for web browser, which shows off all the bare bones of a news article in terms of HTML descriptors, and we are willing to find an area of this code where particular news text is located. In order to do so, you just need to press a single button called F12 on your keyboard. This launches this so-called web page inspector, which shows off the whole spectrum of the attributes. I will check whether I will be able to make it bigger. Unfortunately, due to my screen size, it may be not so efficient to launch that. Bigger. Oh yeah, now it works. So now you can see that I have launched the web developer tools, just like announced in the scheme, procedure scheme, and we are willing, then as long as we can see all the content, how this web page is composed, and as long as we are possible to find those P descriptors telling about the textual content, the question is, how can we locate it quickly? Because uncovering all those points may be time consuming. I want to make it quicker. And for this, we have a magic button called arrow and the screen, which helps a lot to smartly navigate the structure of the content. And now you can see that through the playing around with the mouse, I'm able to find how these P descriptors are located. So you can see that we have P here, and some so-called div container. So modern websites are usually composed around special boxes or containers called div, where web page may include many different content items like text, media, and so on. And RWest now is smart enough to scan through such containers in order to find particular content desired one, because it has its own function dealing with tables, dealing with text, and that is awesome. So that if I locate this area, I see that my frame is violet, and if I left click my mouse button, I will be able to understand what part of my HTML document consists of those paragraphs. Now it is possible to tell R that please use this container part called div class a body flags one in order to grab some textual content. And to be not so long speaking, the best way to extract such content is usually using a special pattern being composed for every web page called XPath. So XPath is something like a service address inside the web page, which tells the browser how particular items inside such container should be structured and located. So it's like internal address inside the address of the news item. And in order to get this item, we usually right-click the mouse button around the line which deals with the whole content, the whole container of div. And we are finding some pop-up window item called copy and XPath. So in Chrome-based browsers, as well as in Firefox-based browsers, this is located in this pattern. Then right mouse click, copy, XPath. Usually in Chromium browsers, it's called full XPath or short XPath. Usually I use full XPath or solely XPath. And when I turn back to my notebook and put somewhere this XPath, it looks like the following. So this is the address of the container, which inside itself has lots of different paragraphs of text, which are suitable for further parsing. Now it's time to understand how can we apply this pattern, like XPath, towards our RWest. How to tell RWest that we need to take everything which is inside this pattern. We have our object, which we can call multiple times. Now it's time to use another function called HTML element, which pops up a documentation page. How can we apply this function? You can see that HTML element is used for extracting some content using one of the possible pathways, like originally the web page or XPath address, below you see the function HTML element or CSS descriptor. So this function is smart enough to grab some necessary content out of any of the service addresses a web page is shipped when loading on someone's screen. And we're going to use XPath option or argument, it's also called. But now when we try to launch this function, we get a problem, the fact that R cannot understand what is that, what is slash, what is HTML and body, because here we need to make attention to the main types of data which R recognizes from its natural being. But from Python, we have significantly reduced number of data types which we can use in any tasks. That is why, although today specialist experts say that R is object-oriented, functional programming-oriented, object programming-oriented, or multi-paradigmal oriented, I usually state the idea that R is fully functional oriented apart from Python, because we do not have many value types. We have only numeric values, we have so-called character values or values for any text, symbols, and so on, and we have logical values, only 3 of them. While in Python, as far as I remember, we have tuples, we have lists, we have also numeric character-based values, logical, and so on. So in Python, we have so many of them, while in R, we are strictly limited to a set of them. And these can be compensated heavily by the big amount of functions. And HTML element is one of them. So in order to announce R that something should be considered as a character-based value, we just need to entitle this area of text with the quotation marks, just like in Python, for example. And now probably we will get something useful. But again, we have a problem that we do not have some useful output. It is said that argument X is missing. And what does it mean? Unlike Python, again, in our language, as long as we are focused on functions rather than on the methods or objects, we need constantly, firstly, announce any function, what object we are going to interact with. And X in any sort of documentation pattern is defined as an object to which a particular function is affected using particular argument, like this one, XPath equals this pattern. So that it means that X should be announced as our web page part being prepared before as in X input, and we are using the argument XPath in order to modify the application towards this object for our further needs. And you can see the outputs that now we are getting something more natural rather than the previous example. It means that R practically managed to understand where is the text. And this is like a great situation because now we are closer to the possibility of creation of semantic network. Now, the last step here is the fact that we need to store this situation and to be able to use it further for extraction of the text content heavily and hence for further needs. In order to do so, do not forget to recode the state. Maybe in Python, it is practically the same, saying that we need to store the results of any method or any function being applied constantly in order to fix the desired result. And in this example, in this case, I'm trying to recode to the same object. Maybe if I'm wrong somewhere else, I may ruin my object, but as long as I'm using the Kaggle platform, I'm sure that I can restart some actions before, so I can start from the very beginning and steadily get to the point where I have some breakdown and fix it anytime and any case. So that I will rewrite that back and check the output in order to see whether I have the desired results which I have found here. Yes, I did, and now I know that this object containing not the HTML document itself, but practically the pure text is done. And the last step is to tell R that please use only textual parts, excluding all those last descriptors like div and p, in order to focus only on the content. There is another function here. It is called HTML text. Here in this example, it is called HTML text 2. And you can see here a pattern not so similar to which I'm using. The reason is the following: the fact that this pattern is organized in so-called tidyverse world. So in historical pattern, R managed to overcome its fundamental problem of writing too many lines of code, too many reassignments, which may be natural for Python language. And the specialists from RStudio incorporate now POSIX Corporation, especially very known figure, Hadley Wickham. He managed to generate a new grammar of data analysis called tidyverse. And using so-called magnifier pipes, we're able to single time announcing the object of the interest and then perform all those steps as one by one, like we're using our news item, quickly getting out the elements according to expect and quickly making it as a text. But we will go steadily in order to see what happens. HTML text 2 towards our data. That we have it. And yes, now we have this information. That is the final result. And you can see that indeed we performed 3 main steps, which can be then converted to a smaller parts like this one. And eventually we will be able to work with such a pattern as a flow. Quickly this step, that step, and so on. So I'm reproducing all these steps in details to show you that practically these patterns can be substituted. Meanwhile, we got the text. And if I compare, I can see that the last sentence for next year and for next year is present. It means that all the paragraphs are picked up. This is the best issue I've found for now. And of course, I need to reassign my object to store this output again. And as I said, we can easily call the object itself without print, which is, as far as I know, or maybe fixed, was not possible in Python. In R, you're free to use print to print out. You can use paste function, so-called, or you can just call the object itself. The result will be the same. Now we have this text. We are practically ready to generate the table of part of speech and NLP processing using one of the models, UDPipe models we've known. But when I compare to the original article, like this one, I can notice that something goes wrong. For example, there are some interesting patterns like these ones. And that is not so okay, because according to any basic principle of natural language processing, when we see such issues, they may ruin the process of creation of semantic networks, because one of the principles is the fact that all those tokens should be unified, being distinct, and separated from each other. It means that space becomes quite relevant and important in order for the functions, models, and computer itself to define where the token starts and where the token ends. I will remind you that the token is any word in our text. It is like a single value called token. It means that we need to write something. So we've passed this step and these steps already. Now we need to use another package called stringer in order to remove some unnecessary things like /n, because they may make some further pain in our semantic network generation. And we should write some pattern or so-called regular expression how R should remove them and how and what to substitute instead of those elements. As long as we've already loaded the package called stringer, there is one useful function which you can use many times. And as for the stringer package, if you are going to work extensively with textual analysis, I strongly recommend you using this cheat sheet and downloads and print out in printing form somewhere else. Somehow, because this cheat sheet is essential for any cases when you are dealing with the text. Unfortunately, even I, being as an R user for almost 7 years, sometimes I forget about particular patterns. So you can find here the fact that there are so many small pieces of information as well as principles, as well as those technical regular expressions, which maybe you will not be able to learn well, but you can refer whenever you want. And this issue is called new line, what I was noticing in our example. You can see these types of /n patterns. In regular expression fundamentals, it is called new line, or like the red line for text. And we need to somehow remove it in order to get the result being done. You will just need, for this case, to learn only a single function, the most universal, the most powerful one, which is called str replace all. This function has 3 main parts. First of all, we need to tell this function which textual item we need to apply for replacing. Then, what symbol or what pattern should we find using this function, and then how we would like to subset this pattern. So that in this case, as long as these symbols are like new line, and obviously it is better to make a space, just single space symbol in order to separate tokens from each other, being linked artificially, I will just subset by space. Any sort of character, any sort of textual manipulation should be covered with quotation marks. That is basic fundamental principle for data types in our language. So we are calling this textual item as all times news item. Then using quotation marks, we are kindly asking R to find those patterns using / according to a cheat sheet, because here we see this pattern, and the best way to find is to use the technical side. It means that we need to use / in order for R to simplify its special pattern. So here in this cheat sheet, it is also possible to notice. When we are finding, we will just need to subset it with this space. So in our language, maybe in Python as well, we are just adding an artificial space between the quotation marks, and this should eliminate all those technical issues as well. So let's launch and see what happens. Now I get the results. When I compare Brussels estimate something, I see a single or a double, by the way, a double space. And good news are the fact that we have eliminated those nasty technical descriptors. Bad news is that we have two spaces. You can think that we could use twice this pattern. I mean, /n/n, and then replace. It is possible, but you should carefully study this text, raw text, in order not to get into a situation when somewhere a single pattern is located. So in this case, we have double, and probably this will be okay for whole text. Yes, it is true. Then it means that we can use only this pattern as the final solution. Also, I have found that there is such a pattern which should be probably also eliminated, and this may make some algorithm being nervous. And for that, we do not have a special pattern, unfortunately, and instead we are going to make some magic maybe, and we will just try out to use this pattern through copy-pasting process. That is the magic itself. Through the copy-pasting process with subsetting to what? And it's a question, because we have here S as a separate letter. Then when we remove if we subset with the space, we can, as long as we will know further that UDPipe models are very brilliant in terms of making all the words universal even when Saturdays are present, and we need to make, instead of Saturdays, Saturday. I will just subset with nothing. I will slip I will concatenate the two quotation marks, so to say, in order to just make no spaces between the two symbols further. So I'm processing that, recoding to the same textual content, and now I get what I want. So you can see that everything seems to be quite well. We have also cases like digits, like percentages, and so on. That is awful, because usually in semantic network we do not use, without special assumptions, we do not use numeric values, because they may be so diverse and may lead to more complex and unpredictable networks. The best semantic network is such one which consists of only standardized and most frequent tokens. And like pandemic, year, economy, European Union will be the best candidates for this case, while numbers should be somehow eliminated because they are present like single types or single time or multiple time. But in reality, they may take too much semantic power to itself without any natural substantial meaning. That is why we remove them. But we are not removing. Yes, you are possible to remove manually using str replace all pattern like 2022 with nothing, 2023 and so on. But again, corpus tools and its defined UDPipe model will deal with that easily, so that we are not going to suffer from too much lines of code. So this text is ready for doing some real semantic network. But before that, we need to pre-process. If you remember, in the glossary, I mentioned processes like stemming, lemma, stem, parsing itself, and so on, parts of speech recognition, and so on. This is important because in this case, in this moment, computer doesn't understand well what does it mean economy, what does it mean will be, what does it mean even this number. It considers only as a number, but it doesn't understand well that this is the year label. Like Brussels, the same percentage, and so on. And we need to tell R what particular token should be considered then. And the best way is to use specific models like UDPy. And in order to perform that, we are going to use the special function called corpus tools, particularly create T corpus. This item becomes quite difficult for the first time to use, but in reality, it becomes quite useful in future. 1 second, I will just show you the main help page of the corpus tools. Here it is. So corpus tools is a very big and a very feature-rich package. It is developed by well-known specialists in semantic network textual analysis, especially Walter van Atterveld, who managed to defend the whole principle of semantic network concept in 2008, and still is one of the most important figures in this area, alongside with Carley, another scientist who developed OR and AutoMap package with colleagues in Kansas University, Kansas project, sorry. And corpus tools is written only in R language. It is specifically written. It means that it consists of very complex namings for functions, arguments, and principles. And hence, it is sometimes important to clarify to someone how all of that is organized. And for this, we are going to apply some of the basic functions, so-called creative corpus, this one, and pre-process function, in order to automate some part of speech recognition and further some preparations for the semantic network. So the principle behind the scenes assumes that we are preparing a special data set of our textual material for further processing, because corpus tools is powerful enough, especially when you have not a single news item, but too many of them, like thousands or millions even news items. For example, in my PhD candidate thesis, I'm running analysis for 1.5 million news items, and corpus tools helps a lot to automate and at the same time simplify the process of calculation of special metrics and visualization issues, because it can eat very big corpus of text. So in order to prepare for corpus tools, again, the further data set, we need to understand how can we store such item into a particular container, or how can we call it, like a list, like a box, or with something like a data, some sort of a data set and so on. And again, apart from Python, we have in R only 3 main basic types how R can store values or sequences of values when we assume that this news item is a single, like a single symbol, a single value. So we have so-called vectors. It is when we have 1 by 1 values separated by comma. Then we have matrix, like algebra from algebra of the mathematical analysis, a matrix, which is like a vector, but with possibilities to be composed in columns and rows. And we have the most common widespread type of data storage called data frame. Data frame, for those who are running Python, is very similar to pandas frame. And data frame in our language is the matrix type, which has a few more enhancements. For example, all the columns in such a data frame may contain labels, and hence the data set becomes fulfilled with column names or variable names. which we can refer, filter out, and use for further needs. And this storage type, it becomes quite relevant and resembling the Excel spreadsheet. So in this case, it means that corpus tools require such an Excel-like spreadsheet where it may find column with identification numbers, assuming that we have not a single item but a couple of them, and another column dealing with textual material for each identification number. As long as we are running here a single textual content, we will make a small data frame which consists of a single row with ID 1 and the corresponding text. So that's we are going to create a cell-times-df, a new object, which consists of two columns, which are usually separated by in such a pattern that firstly we announce the column name, like ID, and we write particular value, so that we create a column called ID with a value of 1. But if you have a couple of simple vectors of the same length, you can compose them into a single data frame, and then instead of the single number, we can call another object. Maybe in Python language, it is also possible to do natural in pandas, I mean, firstly. But in R, you are free to include any type of value. A single value, a composed object, a composed data frame, and so on. So next thing is called text. So our text is composed into this object. So this object, if, by the way, we are going to understand what is that, we can use universal system function called class, and it says that it is a character. So in order to be sure that we are dealing with a character vector, I mean the sequence of simple values, we can also use another function called str and to get a structure. And you can see that we have a character vector with a structure of a single value, which is our very big used item. Hence, it means that we are just calling this single item, and we are able to see what we have in the end. That is our data frame now, where we have ID of 1, our technical ID. It can be from 1 to infinite number. And the second column is called text, so containing the practically pre-processed text. But now, corpus tools will do all its hard stuff work in order to get necessary tokens, exclude unnecessary ones, and we will be able to switch to our further network. So we have such a data frame, so-called. Now it's time to announce such a structure of the future corpus. In order to do so, we will create another object. I assume and I recommend many times to everyone that it is better to provide meaningful names, meaningful object names for any step in order to distinguish between the objects. And if you are running a particular object which has some modifications to be further a starting point for another step, then it is better to reassign or recode to the same object name all the necessary actions we, for example, did here and here and here, and then full stop and start another object, creation of another object, in order not to ruin the pipeline and to be able to have working variables, data sets, and so on for your session. It means that now for the corpus tools corpus object, textual corpus, we will create a cell times corpus, for example, which will be assigning the special result of an action called create T corpus, which in turn has its own specific. In the help page or widget provided by the corpus tools, you will be able to see multiple examples. Just notice. You will be able to see different examples, how to work, how to include, and how to assign. I will use another style, which is designed in its documentation. Documentation is a rather big one, and it's not so evident sometimes, because it follows completely another perspective of programming approach, even far away from Python sometimes. I will use the following, that still, every time we need to, when we apply such functions without creation of a new data set or object, for example, we need to tell any function which original data we're going to apply for and how. So it means that for X, we're calling the previous data frame object. Then we are going to apply another argument called doc column, which means that we need to call the ID column of our data frame in order for corpus tools to provide information about its metadata so that the output of corpus tools is essential because it will contain not only the pre-processed, finally processed text, but also the original, this one, in its special region called metadata. That is why ID number as well as textual column will be necessary for that. And for telling function where the textual column is located, we will use the special argument called text columns, which is called, and we are calling the text column called text because we announced in the step when we were creating data frame, we are using this name as well. And last thing, the most important one, is called unified model. This is what corpus tools will firstly download into each session temporarily, and then apply to the textual column. Again, there are too many models. They are very different, and it's another research which model fits better sometimes. But at least we understand that our original language of the news article is English, hence we are going to use only English-based models. Where they are located, by the way. They are located somewhere here. We have English. I will make it bigger as well. Yeah, we have English EWT model. We have ATIS model. We have SLS. We have Pardot, Lines, and JUM. They are very different, and it's like a question of a taste, which model is better or not. I will use JUM because in our project with Iris, we used, and another colleague, we used to use this language model, which fitted better for our economic news. While Slovenian, we had to jump from one model to another to see what happens next. So we know that it is called English JUM, and hence I will use quotation marks because we are inserting something like a text argument value, textual argument value. We are using English JUM. And we will kindly ask R to print out the result. You will see now that R is downloading this model and quickly processed because not so many sentences are located. And what we get an output. So this message is created temporarily, and later it can be taken off. If we rerun this cell again, we get now the necessary output. We get a final corpus being processed already. We have 311 tokens. It's great. We have one document. It's all right because our ID number is 1. If we process another case with CLNet, we will have 2 documents and more sentences then. And for this single textual item, we have 9 sentences. Thanks to those dots somewhere else here, we are able to tell R where sentences are beginning and where sentences are ending. And the UDPipe model managed to define this aspect. This very complex box with different data consists of 2 main parts. The part with a table of all the pre-processing, natural language processing procedures and the output, and so-called meta, the original text. If we need, for example, to compare the final result with an original one, in case of fire, in case of the situation when we've lost the contents of our data frame, so that we have a copy inside this object. So in order to access our final table and see what we get after all the processing issues, we are calling through dollar symbol without any dot, only dollar, for selecting something like columns, aspects, parts of the box, and so on. And following this guideline, we are using the tokens guideline and try out to get the output. And you can see that we have a big data table. Now we have not only the document ID, that is only one, but we also have sentences, so that any sort of punctuation mark becomes separators. And R, and with the help of UDPipe, is able to understand when sentence starts and when sentence ends up with the dot symbol, like this one. So if it sees that this is a dot symbol and a punctuation mark, then R switches to another sentence number, like 10, for example. And UDPipe model is smart enough to understand that when we need comma, we do not need to create a new sentence number. It is great. We have so many different information about token, about lemma, how universally it should be, what is the initial part of that, what type part of speech, proposition, unexpectedly, pronoun, propositional, yeah, punctuation mark, adjectives, adverbs, numbers, the so-called definitive or articles, which are all can be applied or removed if unnecessary, auxiliary verbs, and so on. So you can understand how R managed to define all those parts of the tokens and understand where each token is what. But the problem is that these tokens are not so ready. We do not have a special final column where all only necessary, like nouns, adjectives, and pronouns are located. And hence, we need to do something more in order to create such a column with a ready-made list of tokens or semantic network. And for that, we know from, we probably skimmed through the example. It mentions the function called pre-process. Now let's use the pre-process. It means that it will create another column which in which we can include all necessary actions. For example, removing all punctuation marks, excluding dots. Then remove all the articles and conjunctions and so on, making them unnecessary. Stemming data in order to make all the words be unified as aggressively as possible, and to remove numbers. So I will write particular quite natural requests, for example, use stemming to normalize all the words. True is a standardized form of the logical value, true and false, like in Python. We also, by the way, we can use a shorter form like T and F, which is also possible, but I will use a more natural form from the historical beginning. use stemming, then we will remove some numbers. Also true. Then we will remove the so-called stop words, those articles and unnecessary words like for, next, and so on. They are usually unnecessary. We tell that language should be English. And when I get, again, list of tokens, right, after such processing, I get a feature column. And now all these words are standardized. They are small caps. All economy, economies, economic, and so on will be economy for more aggressive unification, which is great. And this will be possible to make as more unique tokens as possible, and hence it significantly increases the quality of the future semantic network. Of course, there are some drawbacks. Some of the issues are not so well. Then it means that such phrases or such terms should be somehow dealt with in the step when we replace particular patterns. We can also use like export-oriented, like export, for example, subset by export or something like that. But in this example, we'll skip it, thinking that okay, it is okay. So that's now many of the tokens become unnecessary, and we are ready to work only with nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. Now it is necessary to create a network, so that we are ready for that. Everything is being prepared, no problem. And in order to create such an object, such a graph, using iGraph facilities we've loaded from the very beginning, I will use the further object called SL times graph and use final in this step function called semnet window. So this function is used to generate the network itself according to particular actions. You see, there are many options which we can use, and we will use some of them which are quite necessary, and we apply it in our research, and this helped a lot to study the contents of the data. So first of all, the corpus of text being processed, that is the previous one, the former one. Then we need to include column or list of column as a list of tokens for semantic network. There is a special argument called feature, and we are calling the column for feature because it was automatically generated here in this data frame. Then we are going to tell this function semnet window how semantic network should be considered, which context suits better for us. The whole document is necessary, or we stick precisely to each sentence and pretend that each sentence has its own context. But as long as skimming through the whole textual article, since that the whole document can be considered as a single context, I will use a value context level document. And one last thing is the so-called number of words which should be considered as strictly interconnected, or maybe formed as a click if you heard about this word. This is so-called window size. This argument was originated from Aura and the AutoMap, specifically AutoMap package, which creates semantic lakes or subnetworks of interlinked tokens. It means that when we face, in this case, when we face like list temporarily ends and they are present in the final column, then these words will be interconnected with each other. It sometimes helps a lot to increase the power of PageRank metric and dive better into those tokens of interest, which should be investigated in depth. The size of window is set up usually expertise-based, because someone may say that 2 is okay, someone say 3 is gold standard, someone may say that 4 is better. So that's this number is very particular. So there is no universal rule, but the safest version, when all the necessary phrases can be set up semantically as phrases and not be separated somehow, is the following value 3, like something like a standard. And last thing is called direction. It will be necessary only for a graph. Using this strange symbol pattern, we tell R that there is no direction. We have only a semantic relationship. When you learn something more about network theory, you will discover that particular graphs, not only semantic ones, but general ones, may be targeted to each other, and it will be called directed, or not be targeted, so-called undirected. So they deal with specific goals, when directed are necessary in order to tell who is communicating or sending something to whom, while undirected networks are about the structure of relationship. And for semantic networks, usually undirected nature is more preferable. Usually I automatically use as a pattern. It is better to learn, not to understand, so-called as undirected from iGraph package. Undirected our graph in order to check whether these arguments work better or not. Fortunately, this package, likewise others, may have some bugs and errors. It is normal. And hence, sometimes the developers try to avoid some strict bugs and miss some minor ones. Sometimes this argument doesn't work well, but as long as I know how iGraph package may deal with networks, I can use this function from iGraph package in order to tell completely R that my network is undirected. And hence you can see that it is quite natural, substantial meaning of my design. And let's see the output. Always check how you spell the words. It is natural, and so in Python as well. It's not a problem. But meanwhile, we've got the final result. This is how our graph can be viewed. You do not see here any images here, because this is like a bare bone structure being generated by iGraph, and technically that is the set of matrices of different natures, which indicate particular aspects, like which token is linked to which one, what are the weights, what are the structures, what are the interrelationships or diagonals, so-called, and so on. So too many aspects can be stored in a single object of iGraph nature. In our case, that is a cell times graph. So now we are able to do some statistical analysis or network analysis, especially plotting or making the visualization done. And usually when I finish up generating such a network, I quickly try to plot it, because visualization sometimes is quite useful. For Kaggle platforms as well as Jupyter Notebook ones, I recommend just to learn or to copy and paste later in the handout the pattern which I'm typing in. It is only for Jupyter Notebooks or for Kaggle platform or Google Colab platform, the pattern which helps a lot to make our future visualization quite detailed and bigger in size. Because when I will not right now launch this issue, and we are very close to an end. If I'm not launching this issue, you will see that my image will be awful. But let's see what what we have. So I'm using plots instead of matplotlib. Too many of codes in our language, we use only a single function called plot. That is all. And for making visualization looking quite beautiful, we can add some basic patterns like this one for node size and labels. And you see my text looks like the following. So this image is quite meaningful. We can understand what's going on. We can maybe zoom try out. But unfortunately, this view is not so ideal. So if I try to use this option and launch it first and then relaunch my plot chunk, my image becomes more detailed. And even when I switch to 20 and 20 in white and height, my image may become even better, even more detailed. Now it is possible to see something, but still those nodes, circles are overcoming the text, and we can increase the label size because we're interested in labels more probably. And now you can see how all those semantics are located. We see some interesting chain-based pattern in this news article, and will is noun, by the way, will as a wish, is one of the most central ideas of this text. But where is recession? It is possible to skim through and find where recession is located. We can return back and try to use the search form, confirm recession. Recession only 2 times are mentioned. And when we return back, we can see that this is the word recession. And it seems to me that recession token here is not the most important one because it doesn't have too many linkages with other tokens. So it seems to me that it is a side effect topic of interest. And the most important one here is will being associated with temporal, prediction, higher, slow, export-oriented, country, leads, economy, and so on. So this token becomes one of the core elements of the speech or the idea being delivered by a journalist. We can calculate some of the characteristics like page rank, and page rank is written this way usually. Page rank is being calculated easily, what you saw in the first part. These values are very small, and usually we increase by multiplication by 2000, for example. And you see that the structure of the output is divided into a part called vector and a part called value and options. And in order to manipulate only numeric values, we need to call only vector, like this one. And using magic of our language, we can multiply by 2000 and make the values be more efficient for analysis, because when you saw the previous example of extra small values, sometimes it is not so convenient to study. And this strategy becomes more reliable. So such information can be used for any sort of reporting, as well as being used as input arguments for the networks. But in this case, I will show another example. How can we structure our text in terms of the areas? And in this case, I will use a sometimes graph for another useful clustering algorithm called Louvain algorithm, with the function called cluster Louvain. And this clustering coefficients in information is usually located in the separated object, which later can be used in plotting. So I'm using the former example with plotting, just adding these future results, which consists, we will see after some visualization. Wow, this is the visualization. This object consists of the information which groupings are to be found. So this algorithm managed to find 11 clusters of tokens, which can be also be studied. And if we try to find again the recess, recess. So recession is still linked to the question of debt, interest rate, it means inflation, and least, and prediction, and slow. Still, it means that we thought that recess is not so useful in terms of the semantic position inside the text, but using such a clustering algorithm, we managed to prove an evidence that still recess is semantically linked to questions of debt, interest rate, and inflation. It means that still the journalists managed to create a single view of the situation, trying to add all those terms and tokens which resemble negative scenario of inflation rates, as well as some decline and debt problems. And all other words, they have their own interconnection, which can be also studied for further needs. And one last thing is the way we can use the former information about these PageRank values in order to plot some histograms for reporting. And for example, let's PageRank. Let's make some histogram. And again, it is easily done through the function called hist. So apart from matplotlib, it is possible to use predefined functions in order to visualize particular items. And histogram is one of the most popular ones, and it is possible to create a histogram with all those marks, frequencies, and we are able to study some evidence inside this area. So in general, that is how we manage with colleagues to study those news articles, visualize them, and study in terms of recession location and significance, in terms of PageRank algorithm, and parts of such images as well as outputs for use for building some evidence. So you may eventually see that in general, yes, for the first time, if you haven't ever heard about R or such area, this process is quite difficult. But when you learn the logic in free time, you will be able to understand that the particular small set of functions and codes is used to create from the very beginning to an end the final product. And it looks quite simple, just like this scheme in general. So this is what I managed to outline. Please, do you have, those who are still online, do you have any questions regarding all these aspects?
Stanislav, thank you so much. It's really so in such a detail and so nicely presented. So I think that, yeah, thank you. Thank you. This is a great workshop. So dear colleagues, do you have any questions left for Stanislav?
Well, I have
Irina.
Stanislav, thank you very much for presenting such a wonderful research. We have been following it for some time already, and we have seen, I would say, quite an improvement by today. So thank you very much for sharing it with us. I have very organizational question, probably. Maybe you could tell a little bit in which courses students might learn those techniques working with our program. Maybe some courses you teach, just some general information.
Yeah, thank you, Irina, for the question. Indeed, these aspects are well defined in one of the courses provided by MASNA program. I conduct a course called Social Network Analysis with R language, which very soon will be delivered in a form of the online degree and being accessible for everyone willing to study such area of work. And this aspect of semantic network analysis is hidden as an important part of this course. And in order to understand all these aspects, we are driving through some fundamentals heavily. And if you haven't ever heard about all those aspects, especially our programming, my course follows some basic guidelines, and they say that it's a good source of information for those ones who are willing to learn our language, because we are studying this instrument alongside with network theory and see how it can be smoothly be used not only for network analysis, but also for such side effects like plotting, reporting, visualization issues, manipulation of data, and so on. And these aspects are part of that, and you've seen something like a spoiler of one of the talks we provide with students on particular evening time, usually. So it's a part of interesting story, and the course is built up around some different stories, which are very distinct and at the same time are very logical because they follow one another, and the student usually understands well why everything was originated in such a pattern. And then in the end, student usually understands what's going on in general and is able to apply even more complex methods while knowing nothing before the course. So this aspect is also being discussed heavily there.
Thank you, Stanislav, very much. We have, yes, a question from Anastasia in the chat about sharing a link for this notebook.
Yes, this notebook will be shared quite soon to those ones who are willing. I will also write, if it is possible, my also Telegram account, which you can contact me anytime, and you will get this notebook. But I think that colleagues from MASNA program will deliver that even quicker. And so this notebook will consider all those aspects in details. So I just provided some basic knowledge, short knowledge, so to say, but you will be able to see details. I mean, the notebook considers some side notes, some images, and you will be able to guide yourselves from the very beginning and see what happens in particular aspect.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Stanislav, very much.
Yeah, I also have the links that Stanislav shared with me at the beginning, and so as only the lab members left here, so not only, yeah, we have also Julius, but I just wanted to say that I also have all the links, and of course I will share them with the colleagues. Stanislav, I also wanted to have a question. So do I understand correctly that this set of developments in the code can be, how to say, organized as a kind of package? Do you plan to do it? Like, are you doing it already?
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Daria, for the question. Actually, we are doing some package development with Iris and our previous former colleague, who also joined in some parts of this story. We are planning to present for MASNA program the package which comprises all those packages as a all-in-one solution. And we are just developing last steps considering the interaction issues, how a user can understand better the process in interaction mode. And probably you will see soon the package being designed as a Shiny platform resembling Kaggle, in which user may be able to load any text or any link, they parse its structure, and then see how all the parts of the package presents the final result, a network with all the necessary characteristics. So all-in-one solution will be soon published. We are still in active development with Iris.
Wow, great. So please share it when it is available. Okay. So dear colleagues, yeah. So Stanislav and Iris, I think we should say a huge hello to you. This was a great presentation from the very theoretically grounded, but then it is such a great workshop, very detailed, and everything is so clear as usual, Stanislav, when you're presenting. So yeah, thank you so much, dear colleagues. Thank you for being here. And that's great that we have a recording of this session. And I think this is something to rewatch. And we will definitely advise it to our colleagues who missed this presentation. And we will also share it with you as well, of course.
Yes,
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so dear colleagues, then have a good evening. Goodbye. And we will have one more seminar in this series of scientific seminars next Monday. So we also invite everyone to join next Monday at 6 p.m. and Irina will be presenting there.
Yes. See you on Monday, everyone.
Okay. Yes. Have a good weekend. Goodbye.